and I don't get the words, but he leads me in paths of righteousness. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads us beside still waters. And he's with us through all of the danger and the trials and the turmoils that we have in life. That's the message of the Lord is my shepherd. In John chapter 10, we're introduced to Jesus where he assumes the role of shepherd, and he will explain in great detail the role of the shepherd and the sheep. If you have time today, after church sometime in the evening, just read the whole, maybe 9, 10, and 11, but at least chapter 10. Jesus, in this part of this text, is setting himself apart as the true shepherd versus the false shepherds. The false shepherds in the context being the Pharisees, the scribes, the Sadducees, the people of the law. Jesus he wants to make sure he's not viewed as a hired hand. I know very little about raising sheep, but Larry has convinced me that there is a difference in a hired hand to care for the sheep and someone who actually cares for the sheep. And that's what Jesus is doing here, because there are people in his time and people in every time that are considered the lowest life form on earth because they don't do the job that God intended for them to do. The passage is interesting because it immediately follows the healing of the man born blind. So that's why I should go back and read the other before. So here's John chapter 10, verse 1. I tell you the truth, the man who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in some other way is a thief and a robber. The man who enters by the gate is the shepherd of his sheep. The watchman opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his sheep by name and leads them out. And when he's brought them all out on his own, he goes ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice. But they'll never follow a stranger. In fact, they'll run away from him because they do not recognize the stranger's voice. If I understand correctly, that in that particular time, there may have been several shepherds at the end of the day that brought their sheep into a sheepfold. It could have been a square, rectangular, circle. It could have been something in the cliff. But it was a sheepfold, and there was someone that guarded it. And then later on, or the next morning, when the shepherd came, the watchman let him enter. He called his sheep, and they listened to his voice and followed him. I was going to play some things, but it takes too long. But I saw a bunch of sheep online, and 3 shepherds, one at a time, began to leave and call their sheep. And so many of those sheep, although all mixed together, followed that particular shepherd. When he says here, the Greek word translated pen is an enclosure of some kind. It could be open air, but it was designed as a kind of protection. The picture we're supposed to see in our mind is this is a guarded place. This is a place of safety for the sheep. We're supposed to see Jesus as he encounters the man born blind, who they say is born in sin, and that's the reason that he's blind. Jesus, by the way, doesn't agree with that. We're supposed to see that and Jesus as he confronts the Pharisees. In the verses in John 10, then we learn the true shepherd. So before we do anything else about leaders or shepherds or anything, we're going to see what the ideal, the perfect, the model shepherd would be like. There are three marks he declares by which we can determine the true shepherd. First, he says, I tell you the truth. The man who does not enter the sheep pen by the gate, but climbs in some other way, is a thief and a robber. The man who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. What does he mean by gate? Well, again, there was that little enclosure I showed you, either in a small gate. And the prophets would show you how not to be a shepherd. So you got the gate and you have to enter through the gate. I use this as an illustration. This morning when you came in, I didn't see anybody here with chainsaws and sledgehammers trying to enter through the walls. You entered through a door. It's a way to enter the building. If you came in another way, it would be considered robbery and vandalism. That's what he's saying. There's a way to do something. The prophets will show us how not to be shepherds. They not only ignore the idea of shepherding, but they ignore this concept of the gate. Woe to the shepherds, Jeremiah says, who are destroying and scattering the sheep of my pasture, declares the Lord. What are shepherds doing, destroying and scattering sheep? Ezekiel, son of man, prophesy against the shepherds of Israel. Prophesy and say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Woe to the shepherds of Israel who only take care of themselves. Should not shepherds take care of the flock? You eat the curds, clothe yourselves with the wool, and slaughter the choice animals, but you do not take care of the flock. You've not strengthened the weak, healed the sick, or bound up the injured. You've not brought back the strays or searched for the lost. You ruled them harshly and brutally. So they were scattered because there was no shepherd, and when they were scattered, they became food for wild animals. My sheep wandered over the mountains and over every high hill. They were scattered over the whole earth, and no one looked for them. He says this in Jeremiah 2. This is what the Lord says. What fault did your fathers find in me that they strayed so far from me? Jesus says, when the fathers looked at me, looked at God, why did they run away? What did I do that would cause them to go away? They followed worthless idols and became worthless themselves. So if I follow something worthless, I will become just like it. They did not ask, where's the Lord who brought us out of Egypt and led us through the barren wilderness, through a land of deserts, rifts, a land of drought and darkness, a land where no one travels and no one lives? God is saying, how come they didn't look for me, this God that got them out of bondage and brought them into freedom? Why aren't they looking for me? I brought you into a fertile land to eat its fruit and rich produce. But you came and defiled my land and made my inheritance detestable. The priest did not ask, where's the Lord? Who will deal with the law? Those who deal with the law did not know me. The leaders rebelled against me. The prophets prophesied by Baal, following worthless idols. Therefore, I bring charges against you again, declares the Lord. That's how not to be a leader or shepherd. In the NIV, it reads, leaders rebelled against me. Sometimes when I'm reading something, I'm like, I wonder what it really says. Why would they translate it leaders? And so I began to look up this word. It really says someone who tends to a flock, someone who pastures, or a shepherd. Question. So among all the nations in the world, do they change gods? Well, no, they'll take their gods, and if they're conquered, they'll take some more gods. So he said, as a nation ever changed their gods? Yet they're not gods at all, but my people have exchanged their glory for worthless idols. Be appalled at this, O heavens. Shudder with great horror, declares the Lord. My people have committed two sins. They've forsaken me, a spring of living water, and have dug their own cisterns, broken cisterns that cannot hold water. How many of you remember cisterns? Yeah. Most of you think a cistern is a brother. No, a cistern was a place like in Oklahoma and Arkansas. They were quite common, and they'd have them around the overhang of a house. They'd build it out of cement or block, and when it rained, cats and dogs, they would all go in there, and then they would be able to save that water and work out of it. We had a pond that was constantly fed by spring water. Part of the pond was old and mucky and dirty, but where the spring came, it was always fresh water. It would roll around and roll over the dam. The picture that Jeremiah is painting, he says, you have forsaken this living stream of water, God, and you've dug your own cisterns and they're broken. I've seen some cisterns in houses that were abandoned, and they're cracked, and if there's anything in there, it's just mud. They have exchanged God for nothing. It was prophesied how the shepherd would come. Now, we're still talking about the gate here. Don't lose me yet. We're told how the shepherd would come, where he would be born, to whom he would be born, the unusual nature of his birth, how he would appear to the nation, who would introduce Jesus to Israel, where would he live, what would he say, what would he do? All of that was prophesied. Now that's a kind of a gate. If anybody else doesn't fit in this gate or this prophecy, they can't be Jesus. Some of us have lived long enough for David Koresh and Jonestown and other people who said they were Jesus back in the flesh. This is a gate you would have to pass through in order to be Jesus. No other person in all of history ever came into the world this way. Therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. Virgin will be with child and will give birth to a son, and will call him Emmanuel. For to us a child is born, and to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he would be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. This is description of the shepherd, Jesus. The second thing that happens here is the gatekeeper opens for the shepherd. Now, in the context here, Jesus is both the gatekeeper and the shepherd. But there's a gatekeeper that watched and made sure the sheep didn't wander out. Something didn't get in. You had this depiction of a gatekeeper here, sitting down watching the sheep. Third, the sheep listens to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. I'm going to play two little clips for you, and I'll kind of set it up for you. The first one is of a man, and I didn't want to go to the time. One was like 90 seconds and the other 30. But it's a group of people that tried again and again to call these sheep, and they just ignored him. Then the shepherd appears and he calls. The second one is of a young boy whose name happens to be David, and he's a shepherd, and a man is with him, and he's going to try calling the sheep. You'll see what happens next.
That's amazing. amazing. That's amazing. They're coming. I can't believe this. Did she heard the voice? God, this is amazing.
And I would be a stranger to them. So are they gonna come if I call them?
No, sir, they aren't.
Are they gonna come if you call them?
Yes.
Okay, we're gonna check this out and see if sheep really know the voice of their own shepherd. Okay, so the sheep are out in the pasture, and I'm a shepherd. So let's see if they come. Sheep, come. Oh, sheep, let my sheep go. Sheep, please come. Sheep, come. Sheep, my sheep won't come. Okay, let my sheeple go. Oh, sheep. David, this is not working. They don't know my voice. So here you go. Here's your chance. Can you get those sheep over here?
Yes, sir. Come on, sheep. Hey! Hey! Come on, sheep. Hey! Hey! Come on, sheep. Come on. Hey!
Four things distinguish this fact. First, Jesus calls them by name. When you think of almost every encounter that Jesus had, it was on an individual basis. Now, there's exceptions to that. But think about these cases. Nicodemus came to him by night. He didn't look at his watch and say, I'm sorry, it's 6 o'clock. You'll have to come back tomorrow. He met the woman at the well of Samaria. The disciples would have gone around it, but Jesus said, no, I need to go through Samaria. He met the impotent man at the pool of Bethesda. He met the man born blind. He calls Zacchaeus a short man in a tree. He calls him by name. He says, come down. I've got lunch scheduled with you at your house. He calls Matthew. He's there collecting taxes. He calls Peter, James, and John, who've been washing their nets. But he calls all these people on an individual basis. That's one of the reasons Jesus said, go make disciples, plural, teaching them. But it's hard to teach more than 8 or 10 disciples at a time and be effective. Jesus tried it with 12 and lost one. Throughout the centuries, every time someone makes the determination, I'm coming to Jesus, it is a personal, not private, but personal decision they make on their own. A few times he's dealt with a group, feeds 4,000, feeds 5,000. You'll see him with some other smaller groups, but most of the time it's with the individual. Why? He calls us out of our loneliness. He calls us out of the silence. He calls us out of the frustration. Jesus has the ability to make me better. And so he calls. The second thing we find is he leads them out. It's an interesting phrase because of this man born blind, because the Pharisees threw him out of the synagogue. Jesus takes him thrown out of the synagogue. By the way, that wasn't really new. Remember, the whole discussion was, son, did you sin or was it your parents? Jesus said it's neither one. But that would have kept him out of the synagogue. At least if he was there, he was treated as a non-person. But Jesus leads him to a spiritual life. Then they heard insults at this man and said, are you this fellow's disciple? We're the disciples of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses, but as for this fellow, we don't even know where he comes from. I love this next phrase. The man answered, now that is remarkable. You don't know where he comes from, yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners. He listens to the godly man who does his will. Nobody's ever heard of a man opening his eyes of a blind man. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. To this they replied, you're steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us? And they threw him out. The man was saying, look, I don't understand your theology and all. I don't understand any of it, but I was blinder than a bat, and now I see. So explain that to me. Jesus takes this occasion. These are the moments I wished I could always see, be made aware of. Jesus takes this man who's out of a false teaching environment of the Pharisees, and he used that occasion to take him into spiritual blindness. Yes, he healed him physically, but he had a greater malady than his physical blindness. Jesus, as the shepherd, calls us as his disciples and leads us out of blindness. The world around us, if you ask them or you told them they're blind, they would laugh and mock you. Yet it's the very darkness they're in that keeps them blinded. The philosophy of the world can be summed up in me first. Right? Have you gone to sleep on me? The philosophy of the world is me first, right? You look at all, it's just, it's always been there. But now with social media like it is, I mean, you can just see it. You can tell it's all about me. It's all about my decision. You need to look at me. Click here, click there, become a member. I don't understand it all, but it's all about me. When a person comes to Jesus, he or she almost immediately begins to think outside of themselves. I saw this last Wednesday night as talking to someone, and the person's a new Christian. They said, yeah, well, we're looking at a friend, and this friend is, and I thought to myself, here it is. Barely dry after baptism, and people are eager to tell their friends. That's what disciples do. You have a message that you got. It was great news. It means you get to go to heaven. You don't have to go to hell. You begin to think, maybe there's others who don't want to go to hell either. In fact, the rate of Christian growth, I believe, can be measured by how much a person begins to think about others instead of himself. Since Christianity is an others-oriented religion. We talked this morning about some one and other passages in our class. It's never about just me. It has to be me and Rusty, or me and Samantha, or me and Larry, or me and Robert. Some has to be something else. That's the very first thing the Lord does. He leads us out. Second, he goes before them. As the shepherd, he goes before them. So as I was reading this, before I got to the part below this, I thought to myself, okay, he's leading them. He's leading them out. He's going ahead of them, and that would be important to me. How? Well, I've never been down this way before. No, but Jesus has. I've never been involved in this before. No, but Jesus has. We do not have a high priest who's unable to sympathize with our what? Weaknesses, but we have one who's been tempted in every way, just as we are, with one major important exception: without sin. So when you're going down this and you think, well, I haven't been down there before. No, but Jesus has. So your relationship with Jesus will make a huge difference how you view the various roads and avenues you go down. Number 4, the sheep trust his voice. They will never follow a stranger. In fact, they'll run away. I didn't have time to show you, but it was interesting that there was a big bunch of sheep, and One of them came up and the sheep began to run. I didn't know who that guy was, and they were out of there. You remember when we were younger, our parents, or we told our children, beware of strangers? Be careful. It's just as dangerous today, or maybe more so. But don't follow strangers. Don't get into a car. Beware. I saw a short clip on YouTube where this evangelist said this. It's almost word for word. Rusty, if you'll become a Christian, God will make you rich. That'd be interesting, wouldn't it? How many people would be rich? How many people would follow Jesus just for riches? So when you begin to hear this, again, it's a strange sound. It's a voice you can't trust. I don't have to understand all of what's wrong with all the religions of the world. I just need to know what's right with Jesus, the truth. All right, as you grow in the Lord, you'll begin to understand truth in Jesus, and it's always versus the world. It was in his day. It's been that way for the last 2,000 plus years. It'll be that way until he comes again. You begin to get an insight of how the world views things. It knows nothing about, but it would claim to be the authority. For example, despite all the proud, pretentious claims of secular minds, science, art, literature, history, the things of men, they are all affected with profound blindness. You know, they said, let's get God out of the school. Let's put science in there. Well, how does that work for us? How has that helped us? Well, we don't want to deal with God. We want to deal with literature and history. That didn't work for us either. This explains the mess of the world. And by the way, the Democrats can't fix it. The Republicans can't fix it. The independents can't fix it. It's a mess. And the only one that can fix a mess is Jesus. I don't care how many commercials they play, how many billions of dollars they spend. The only person who can help your life or the life of a friend is Jesus. We're going to read this and a couple more things and we're through. Paul said, for the message of the cross is foolishness. The idea of a person dying on a cross is dumb. To those who are perishing, it is. But to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. For it's written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, the intelligence of the intelligent. I will frustrate. Remember this here in a moment when we get to another slide. Because he says, where are the wise? Where's the wise? Where's the scholar? Where's the philosopher of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world beyond belief? For since in the wisdom of God, the world through its wisdom did not know God, God was pleased. God was pleased through the foolishness of what was preached to save those who believe. Here's an example of God's wisdom and man's foolishness. The following should end any gender discussion of any kind. Get some roosters for eggs, get some bulls for milk, and you'll see that gender matters, especially at milking time. Now, we laugh at this, yet we know it's fact. If you don't understand that, come up and talk to me after church and I'll help you out. People would say, well, yeah, but God created me this way or God made me this way. In Genesis, it said God created them male and female. He created them. And for man to get in and muddy the water and mess it all up doesn't change the wisdom of God. It only shows the stupidity of man. Because we refuse to follow the one who created everything, including us, made our minds, knows our abilities. And yet we have to have something this simple to finally explain to us our life. I'm the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired man is not the shepherd who owns the sheep. When he sees the wolf coming, he runs away, abandons the sheep. The wolf attacks the flock and scatters. Why does he run away? The man runs away because he's a hired hand and cares nothing for sheep. But Jesus said, I'm the good shepherd. I know my sheep and my sheep know me. Just as the Father knows me and I know the Father, I lay down my life for my sheep. And he did. So as we launch into this study of leaders and shepherds, Jesus is the role model. I mean, we know that, but it might help when we're talking with someone if we said, well, Jesus said, or we read it from him that Jesus says, because Jesus is the final say. And the only thing that you can know with assurance, you can pull your full weight down, is that Jesus loved you more than he loved his eternal existence in heaven, more than he loved equality with God, more than all the power he had and all the ability. He set that all aside and loved you enough that he died, he was buried, and thank God he was resurrected. If you're here and not in Christ, if you don't have a relationship with Jesus, meaning he's freed you from your sin, you really need to change that. We say that with gentleness. If you don't understand, tap some of us on the shoulder as you're leaving. We'll be happy to tell you what Jesus has done for us, how he's changed our lives. You need prayers, you need a church home. Let us know while we stand and sing.
I